All right. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. I guess we have to cover all our bases. This is the Morbid Symptoms Podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, and I'm joined by Garrett from the Social Populist. And I'm also very happy that a Morbid Symptoms behind the scenes contributor is now on screen. So Zulaika is here. Welcome, Zulaika.
Thank you, Tara.
And so we have a bit of a heavy menu, if you could say, but in a good way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about Garrett's recent Substack on the Social Populist, which everybody should check out, called Revolution and Counterrevolution: What Populists Should Know. And I think also we'll ask him again. I ask him every time, I think, or well, when the topic is his work, what he means by why he adds the social to the populist, which is important because, well, we'll find out why that is. And Zulaika and I are going to we'll go through some of the highlights or the main parts of his article. We'll have a discussion about that, and encourage all of you, of course, to bookmark it and look at it, read it later. I think at this point it's free to everybody, right, Garrett?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so you don't have to pay, but of course, paid subscribers are welcome. Also, you can check out my Morbid Symptoms Substack, and which most of the stuff is available for free. Unless you want to comment, then you have to pay. But it would be nice for everyone who can pay to pay because, I got to feed these kids and pay the rent and all this stuff. All right. And then, if time permitting, after that, if we still have fuel in the tank, we may talk a bit about Venezuela, in particular the U.S. Interest in saving Venezuelan democracy and making sure the will of the Venezuelan people are not subverted, and interesting Twitter exchanges between Juan Guaido and Elon Musk. Interesting things are going on in the interregnum. Anyway, on this note, Garrett, so why don't we start off with just a bit about what prompted you to write a piece on this? What's going on that said, okay, I need put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard to sort these things out.
Well, I originally didn't, pitch this article to you to discuss because it was kind of largely directed at sort of the right populist, audience that I have to some extent, but that's where most of the populist action is. So it's an important audience to address, and in that audience, somewhat confusingly, revolution and radical democracy aren't necessarily appreciated, with a sort of odd contradiction that at the same time they're admirers of the American Revolution. I'm talking here about American populists, in 1776 and reviving the spirit of 1776, etc. To the point where they're even like skeptics of the French Revolution. And this, to some extent, goes back to this guy who's called the father of modern conservatism, Edmund Burke, who was a British parliamentarian in the 18th century. And the fact that he supported the American Revolution, but not the French Revolution. He's like the most famous contemporary critic of the French Revolution. Now, of course, he was told off by Thomas Paine, the leading intellectual of the American Revolution, and one of the leading lights of it. He wrote Common Sense in 1775 and basically gave the United States of America its name, and proposed that the various rebellions that were around in the 1770s be turned into a full-fledged revolution and break for independence against the British Empire. And he got smacked down by Thomas Paine, who defended the French Revolution. But still, there are still people on the right, including some right populists who sympathize with Burke's arguments, which I don't think are particularly coherent.
Okay, before you go, sorry to interrupt you, but before you go on, can you please make a distinction between social populism, and right-wing populism, or is there a distinction between? I mean, yeah. So so why add the social to populist? I guess is what I should say.
Well, I am basically coming from a left-wing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's a socialist perspective. Maybe the question is why the populism is there, because
okay, yeah, that's true.
At the same time, like
that's right, Garrett, you're right.
There is such a thing as anti-democratic socialism. I don't think that Marxist Leninism automatically means that, like everyone else does. I think the most anti-democratic form of socialism is what Marx called bourgeois socialism. In the Communist Manifesto, he denounces bourgeois socialism and utopian socialism, and even conservative socialism, which I guess would be sort of the proto-fascism of his time. But to me, very much contrary to what the right thinks, Marxism is the true populist version of socialism, because it's accountable to the masses and lifting up their interests. And the proletariat for Marx was just another name for the masses of people, for the majority of people. Mm-hmm. The industrial workers who created the wealth of society and ought to own the means of production that they operate to create the wealth and prosperity of society. Mm.
All right, so but just I don't want to get too in the woods with the theory. I mean, I love theory, but when you say that proletarian was just another word for the masses, I'm like, really? I get what you're saying.
In Central Europe, where he was writing.
Well, in terms of who's producing the wealth and what, but again, there's always been this, and again, I don't want to get too far off the weeds, but there's an ongoing discussion about artisans, about small business owners who maybe only have like maybe their own labor and maybe one or two people, and then the peasants, yeah. And then the actual like people who are working, the fully waged labor. So whereas the proletariat is the whole thing about you're dispossessed of the means of production, so then you have to sell your labor on the labor market. But I mean, this. But I mean, I don't oppose the fact. I have no problem. I think it makes more sense, politically speaking, to talk about the people than the proletariat. Because people, we're like. I think it is a technical theoretical term that refers to a structural position, whereas the people and workers, that's more obviously accessible to people. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. I just my ears.
The Marxist theory is that the trajectory of industrial society is that as it progresses, then everyone does become essentially a proletariat. I mean, under the market, certainly.
Yeah, alienation.
Majority of small businesses fail, or if they're successful, they get bought out. And the people who work for them are either become proletariat of some kind, or they move up into the bourgeoisie. Mm-hmm. But that, like in a fully developed industrial society, the proletariat are going to be the majority, just through the workings of history.
Mm-hmm. And you don't get too bogged down.
We don't like that, but that's the way it's going, right?
Yeah. Well, and I would say that some people want to get in these really minute discussions, like is a barista a working class and is a waitress, and I'm just like, I just find that so unuseful. I mean, again, if you want to have get into the nitty gritty of labor value and all that, okay, fine, or value theory. But to me, when you're talking about a social populist movement or politics, that makes no sense to make those kinds of distinctions to me. Like, a waitress isn't really labor, but isn't working class, but only people who but the mechanic is, or you know, do you find any value in that? Do you think people should just kind of let it go, especially when they're doing politics?
Man, that's a heavy one. I actually
And I
like
also want Zulaika
serious.
to ring in on this as well after Garrett gives us his. And again, this is off the cuff, people. This is how good we are. Spontaneous, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no feeding of anything. So good, and of course you can always say, yeah, table that. We'll get back to it later. Totally fair.
Yeah. Well, to me, working class and proletariat are a bit different. And I don't know if Marx consistently made that distinction, but I think that may fit into like an area of Marx that has to be revised up from the 19th century.
But yeah, but my question was more when we're doing political talk, when we're doing politics, does it really make sense to bring in these divisions? Like, because again, some of the people online, I've had fights with what I call BAMs, the born again Marxists, who want to tell me like, well, barista isn't this, and then they get mad at me because I don't fetishize volume 1, chapter 1 of Capital, and they'll say like your labor is blah blah blah, and I'm like, dude, seriously. But anyway, that's what I mean. I appreciate we can get into the political, the theory part of it, but I mean in terms of politics. Does it make sense for people to try to like poo on, baristas, for example? They tend to like to talk about baristas. I don't know why. Maybe because a lot of them have graduate degrees and are baristas. Maybe that's the case.
Yeah, well, that's related to the whole idea of like what's productive labor, what's like real capital, and there is like a kind of a Marxist distinction that like, capital with a capital C or even commodities with a capital C are kind of like raw materials, that are like the basic building blocks of the economy. And so, that's mainly like industrial workers or even agricultural workers. And I guess maybe the practical argument for making that distinction is that those jobs are they're more stable, and those sectors of the economy are more stable, whereas the other ones are all kind of fluctuating, with the market and the booms and busts, and a barista isn't meant to be a long-term job. Under most market conditions, it can't be a long-term job, and that may fit under the lumpen proletariat category that Marx and Engels had.
Okay, but I would assume that what I'm getting at is when you're talking, like when your target audience is. So my guess is you're trying to make people who may not call themselves populists but seem to be acting and engaging in a populist way to go towards the social populist vein and away from the right populist vein. Would that be a fair interpretation of maybe one of the goals with your work?
Well, I guess away from economic conservatism.
Yeah. So then in that case, then when you're picking these people, then it doesn't really matter if they're a waitress or a factory worker or a janitor or a truck driver or a teacher, nurse, whatever. Yeah. It's like I would assume that the economic policies in general would benefit all those that we would be proposing or you'd be proposing would benefit all those people, maybe not evenly. It wouldn't really. Yeah, that's kind of the point I wanted to make. But Zulaika, do you want to chime in here on any of this before we go on with Garrett's paper?
I mean, I was going to mention something about. I mean, we talked about other types of proletariat, but we didn't get to sort of talking about the lumpen proletariat. And I think, like, there has been a lot of lumpenization of workers, or people who should have been workers because for whatever reason the jobs which they should have don't exist anymore, or they've been outsourced abroad. Or in the case of a lot of women, they're being turned into online prostitutes. So I was wondering if he had any comment on the lumpenization of the people in the West specifically?
Well, it's a bad development. It's it's why I sympathize with sort of aspects of the populist agenda that emphasize reindustrializing society, Western society, so that people will have more stable jobs that I think are more dignified with sort of reproducing the basic building blocks of the society, rather than these sort of hedonistic things that are often just about servicing rich people who have disposable income, or sort of depressed and alienated middle class people who are patronizing prostitutes or what have you.
Okay. All right. So let me bring on. Oh, I can still see this good. This is we're not gonna go through. I'm not gonna read all of Garrett's article, but I do want to touch on the highlights to get the main point. So if I understood correctly, is this like there's this thing that even though there's people on what were you calling the populists who really dig the American Revolution or their idea of what the American Revolution is, but since then no longer, it's like, okay, that was great, but all other ones are suspect or problematic or always going to cause more harm than good, etc. And you bring out Curtis Yarvin, and Curtis Yarvin, for people who don't know, look him up. He's a cool. I have to say, there's people who I can't take, whose politics I don't share, who it's really hard for me to listen to. But I actually find Curtis Yarvin entertaining. It's the same thing with Peter Hitchens. I can listen to Peter Hitchens. I don't know. It could be the accent though. Even though I don't agree with a lot of them politically, it's just. And then there's some people who I just can't take. I'm not going to listen to Ben Shapiro. I'm not going to listen to too much Jordan Peterson when he's talking about cultural Marxism. I'm not going to listen to too much of, whatever, Rufo, or a bit, because you need to know. But there's a certain people who, even though I don't agree with, or I think they're kind of, I don't know. I just don't think he's a bad guy, I guess. Maybe he is. Maybe he pulls wings off, insects. I don't
Rufo
know. Anyway.
Yarvin.
Yeah, Curtis Yarvin.
Rufo finally came out against the quote unquote anti-Semitism legislation, to his credit.
Oh, well, it took him a while. Yeah. No, he's very his values when it comes to council culture and free speech are very, let's say,
flexible.
Israeli. But then he works for this again. He works for the Manhattan Institute, which I realized when I was doing there was a couple of people who were really big so-called gender critical guys on the biological and medical part of it, who also became like IDF spokespeople on a dime after October 7th. And I looked into it, and a lot of them seemed to work at the Manhattan Institute, and some of them actually have served in the IDF, so it wasn't a huge surprise. But Rufo is also Manhattan Institute, which was just started by a retired CIA head, and is funded by all kinds of the American Enterprise Institute,
Bill Gates.
and
Bill Gates. Nice to see Bill Gates still keeping his fingers in the neocons as well as the neoliberals.
Yeah. So you start off with a Curtis Yarvin quote, and I'll read it, and then I'll ask you why you began with this. So this is Curtis Yarvin, and it's the beginning of Garrett's recent Substack called Revolution and Counterrevolution, What Populists Need to Know. So this is Yarvin. It was a breakthrough for you when you realized that Nelson Mandela was actually just a leftist. Then it was another huge breakthrough for you when you realized that Martin Luther King was actually just a leftist. But you think you're done, don't you? I want to see the expression on your face when you realize that Samuel Adams was actually just a leftist.
Yeah, so that's Yarvin addressing Rufo in this debate that they had for an online conservative magazine. And Yarvin, I appreciate him, I guess, as a satirist, even though maybe he's an unintentional satirist.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't talk. That could be
Right,
true.
well,
Maybe he makes me laugh, but he's not trying to. That could be possible.
Yeah. I mean, he's thought-provoking. So he's like a neo-monarchist, and he's famous for this like metaphor about like the ruling class and its like liberal organs and its like liberal bureaucracy that it has nowadays. He refers to it as the cathedral. And I guess his argument is that like we already live kind of under neo-feudalism, so we may as well go all the way back to back to original feudalism.
Yeah, get the top shelf.
Yeah, and so he's like the first guy on the mainstream or semi-mainstream right to sort of advocate counter-revolution. And lately, Rufo has like sort of tried to hop on his train to some extent, or maybe he's just absorbing, the residue that he's put out. But like Rufo is like sort of he's
The
mixing
residue. The residue. That was a nice burn, Garrett. The excretion. He jumped on the excretion.
the virus that he's shedding.
Sorry.
But Rufo is kind of like mixing his metaphors because he's saying that he's like in the spirit of the founding fathers of 1776, and particularly Samuel Adams, who kind of kicked off the revolution, in Boston. And so Yarvin is kind of chiding him, and he's pointing out that the founders were progressives in their time. They were definitely not counter-revolutionaries. Yeah, I mean, there's a thing that Christians say sometimes that God is moving towards a certain person, even if this person doesn't know it. I like to think that like the specter of communism may be moving through Curtis Yarvin without him being aware of it. He's
Garrett's
kind of
on fire tonight. Yeah, well, it also reminds me of that Hegel thing about historical figures or something, like when isn't there? I don't know if he actually thought this, but even though Napoleon going through Germany wasn't very good for for him, he didn't even like think like he was watching world history on a horse, or there's some sort of quote like that. That that maybe the cunning of history or something, that they may not be aware of it, but they could also they're playing a role in a process that they could be doing things that are contributing to that contribute to what we think is a good process, but not intentionally or for different reasons or something. Is that what you're? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, he's kind of like he's heightening the contradictions.
Good. Another one.
I mean.
We bring top shelf people up morbid symptoms. Okay, go ahead, Garrett.
Well, in the opening quote, I mean, he's kind of pointing out something that like the far right, the populist right, has been doing the past couple of years, where like, on one hand, it's like shocking and disturbing, but as I said, it's just a contradiction. It's just kind of like developing. It's like we're conservatives, like even black conservatives to some extent, are like. Martin Luther King was shady because he had all these communist friends. They were right that he was a communist.
Tainted.
Right?
He's tainted.
Yeah. And it's like, and Yarvin is kind of pointing out like, but in some ways the American revolutionaries were like communists of the 18th century within the context of their time. It's like, how far are you going to go with this? And he dug up this debate between John Adams and Samuel Adams, which was really interesting, where John Adams is like saying, we need to be really careful with this democracy thing. It could get out of hand, and there's a lot of good things about aristocracies, and we shouldn't throw the baby out.
Which isn't untrue, actually. It just depends on, but if you get nasty people in there, then you're a problem. Or you get a family, and then okay, yeah, one group's good, and the next batch of kids are crazy.
Well, yeah, one generation, I guess. Yeah. But Samuel Adams really isn't having it, and he sort of denounces aristocracies and says that all people are capable of improvement with education, and he advocates for public education. At one point in that letter, he says something kind of anti-racist for his time, where he says, "quote even the savages can be educated and brought up to our level." Sounds pretty racist, but by our standards. But for the 18th century,
well, compared to people who thought that there was no point, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's like relative, yeah.
So so Yarvin, he made like an intervention here, just like pointing out that revolution is kind of where modern society, well, not modern society.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I would like to read out the second paragraph, because it's also quite good, because you wrote it. So let's enjoy your words, and then we'll see if Zulaika wants to say something before we continue on with this. So first, you have the quote where he's basically saying, "Okay, well, what will also blow your mind is that Samuel Adams is also just a leftist," and then this is Garrett coming in. The above quote is the money shot in a sprawling debate between Christopher Rufo and Curtis Yarvin, which took place earlier in the year and seemed appropriate to revisit on the 4th of July extended weekend. Rufo and Yarvin are both right-wing superstars, but they have an important divergence. Rufo is a conservative, that is, someone who strives to moderate the side effects of social change, which is interesting, that's a nice tight definition. So Rufo is a conservative, that is, someone who strives to moderate the side effects of social change. Yarvin is a reactionary. That is someone who desires flat out counter-revolution. Okay. Yarvin, I'll read this other paragraph too. Yarvin is probably a fascist. Well, yeah, he wants the monarchy, the cathedral. Okay. Yarvin is probably a fascist, but that doesn't change the fact that he's a good writer with valuable things to say. Good, and in fact, Yarvin, the supreme anti-communist, may understand Marxism better than most American socialists currently do. I would agree with that. He seems to be worried that Rufo's present anti-woke campaign would accidentally revive classical Marxism by suppressing race Marxism and sparking revolutionary spirit in America. He may be right to worry. All right, so I'm going to pull that down now. And I haven't watched, full disclosure, I haven't watched this debate between them two. But between the two,
do I? Print.
Oh, is it? Okay, good. Oh,
yeah,
good.
There's a link to it in the.
That's nicer.
I think it's the first link in the Substack.
Okay. Now, do I need to read it, or do I just need to read? Or is your article enough, or do I?
It's a fun read. They
okay.
They burn each other.
They
really kind of despise each other, and
oh, do they? Oh, now I want to watch it with like popcorn. Okay.
Well, it's only in print. I could put the link in the chat if you want to.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So we have these two quote. We have these. So we have a debate, and we have what you're saying is that Yarvin's probably technically or objectively a fascist, a reactionary, whereas you make the distinction between reactionary and conservative. Why do you think that's an important distinction? And do you think that this is how Rufo would describe himself, or is this how you see Rufo? Because some people think conservative is not just moderating the effects of change, but trying to actively preserve certain core things that shouldn't be, the Chesterton fence type argument.
Yeah, I think conservative is like a more broad term that encompasses social conservatives. People who are just social conservative but economically liberal or economically radical. So. Rufo's emphasis, thus far, is more on social conservatism, and it's but not on not necessarily on political conservatism in the sense of wanting to go back to a monarchy. I mean, it's all relative, but compared to Yarvin, he's not a reactionary. He's not this ultra conservative.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Zulaika, before we go on, do you want to say anything at this point?
No, because I have questions and my memory just needs to be put a bit.
Okay. So, all right. So that sets the scene. So what is the thing? What do populists need to know about revolution and counter-revolution? And or what do that they're not getting, or that's becoming, or that's mystified, we might say, and the types of discussion like you talk about with Rufo and Yarvin.
You made him sound like a French intellectual, Rufo.
Sorry, Rufo. Well, how's he say his name?
Rufo.
It's Rufo, yeah.
Yeah, he's Italian, I think.
Yeah, sorry. It's Rufo. I
just thought it was funny. We could
call him
Rufo from now on. That'd be funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Yarvin, from Yarvin's perspective, he is a radical.
Actually, I guess what I would say is that what? Okay, I guess what I would ask of you, is that what? Okay, so Rufo. So on this debate, Yarvin's main beef with Rufo is what, and what is Rufo's main beef with Yarvin, and then we'll get to your point about what populists need to know about revolution and counter-revolution.
Well, Yarvin's point of view is that the Enlightenment and everything that's happened since it is part of one long revolution. And Rufo's is that it isn't. it's
a mixed bag.
it's that all. Is that revolutions are generally bad, except for the American Revolution. And I guess his position is that the American Revolution is somehow not part of the Enlightenment, which is, I kind of explained is nonsensical. Not just in terms of the intellectual history, but more in the history of it. And in some ways, it's not even just part of the strict Enlightenment. In terms of, whatever John Locke and post-scientific revolution and all that. But in some ways it comes out of, just Protestantism, just like defying the cathedral, the original cathedral, of the Catholic Church, because of course the first regicide of the Western world was when the Puritans in the 17th century, chopped off the king's head because they were afraid that he was dragging the country back to Catholicism. And there were American Protestant enthusiasts of the French Revolution at first, because they perceived as an anti-Catholic revolt.
No, I wasn't aware that people were making that argument that somehow that somehow the American Revolution is unique in terms of all revolutions, in particular unique in the modern period. So it's like, the French Revolution, that's all the way over there. Haitian Revolution, that's all the way over there. The American one is somehow, I guess exceptional, which kind of goes with the theme. But
it's an under-discussed aspect of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, how exceptional our revolution was.
Yeah.
And it's very unfair that the French one gets all the attention. I guess in theory, theoretically, that's jealous. Yeah, it's like, why are all these people still writing about the French Revolution, even the Haitian one? Why isn't people should be given love to?
Yeah, I mean, there is a body of literature that talks about it as all one, revolutionary.
A chain, that you need to look at them together. Yeah,
but I don't know. I guess.
And then
consumer
unfinished. The
revolution-
bourgeois revolution is unfinished. Of course, a capitalist or not a capitalist, well, maybe a capitalist, a good Marxist would say, well, yeah, the bourgeois revolution is unfinished because of its core contradiction between labor and capital.
Yeah,
I would think, yeah.
yeah. A lot
So
of people would say that.
so we're still we're stuck in these cycles because that's a hard nut to crack, apparently, without going so far in a not so nice direction.
Yeah, I mean, Lenin would say that most of those, bourgeois innovations should be defended against, definitely against aspects of feudalism.
Yeah.
And monopoly capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it's also that I should, to be fair, that the attempts to overcome the core contradiction of bourgeois society, or industrial society, the capital labor one, the one between capital and labor, according to Marxists. There has been movements that tried to do something about that, but they were also heavily attacked, let's say, or the imperial powers did everything they could to make those experiments or innovations unsuccessful, which is also a tie-in to Venezuela maybe later on in the show. Because what I mean is, like, people will like to say, like, and liberals will do this too, like, oh, you say you want revolution, but look at, the gulags, and look at the culture revolution, and the killing fields of Pol Pot and all that stuff. And of course, I'm no fan of the Pol Pot killing fields, of course. Yeah. And but it's also the fact that we've talked about this before, Garrett and I have. Garrett's quite knowledgeable about, way more knowledgeable about Russian and Soviet history than I am. Is that if you want to look at what happened and didn't happen in the Soviet Union, you have got to put it in the context of what was going on globally with capitalism and imperial powers that were doing everything they could to disrupt that from happening. They don't want proof of concept. That there are different alternatives for sure. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Like, hostile encirclement is something that most revolutions have had to face.
Mm-hmm.
And the English and the American revolutions have been very, very privileged, like, geographically, in just not having to deal with being encircled by hostile defenders of the old regime. And as I point out here, like, if America had powerful neighbors, and if England had more technological advantages in the 18th century, then there definitely could have been a terror after the American Revolution. And we know this from the attitudes of some of the founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin threw his own son in a dungeon for nearly a year, like solitary confinement. Like, living in his own filth. He got sick and nearly died. And then they deported him to England, and Benjamin Franklin never spoke to him again, essentially. Like, he completely severed ties with all loyalists and wanted to be thrown out of the country because they were a huge security risk. And if the British Empire had not agreed to resettle them, 70,000 of them, in the other colonies, then there's a good chance they would have ended up like Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I never they're coming to get me. No. Again, I'm not, I would never call myself a student of the American Revolution, but as a really interesting point, that if the loyalists, because people will tend to assume that everybody was on board. Everyone's like, yeah, let's have this revolutionary war. Let's fight against the British. That a lot of people were not down with that, or so for lack of a better, it's like, yeah. So what would happen to those people if there wasn't space for them to get the hell out, essentially, or to go back to England or to the UK? What would have happened to them? Yeah, it could have been quite nasty. I never hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, and
Is this a Garrett observation, or is this other people have talked about this?
there's a few people who've made it, but I think it's definitely under discussed.
Yeah.
I'm just like fascinated by the fact that, like, Benjamin Franklin did that to his son, and no one talks about it. And like his son, I live in New Jersey. His son was the colonial governor of New Jersey, and he was the founder of Rutgers University. But nobody ever talks about him. William Franklin, his name was.
Okay.
Because there's a scandalous story about it where he was like a loyal.
Well, it doesn't make William doesn't look good, but also his dad looks like a dick. So
yeah, well, his dad looks like a revolutionary. That's what he looks like a leftist.
Oh well, okay, Garrett.
As Curtis Yarvin would say.
Revolution before family. But good note. Yeah, I wonder how many people are aware of the story of William Franklin. Yeah, that he was a loyalist or royalist. Loyalist to the royalists. A loyalist, so he was opposed to the Revolutionary War, or to the and founded Rutgers University, and then had to, after being imprisoned, solitary confinement for a year, had to go off to be exiled back to, or I'm guessing he was born in the United States or the colonies.
Yeah.
Had to go back to England. It's like go back to England or. Well, and it makes sense, and I get. Well, I mean, it's not. Again, I think when those of us who haven't been part of a moment of history like that or in it, tend to get really like, oh my god. But it's like, if you just fought a Revolutionary War, what are you gonna do with the group of people who were on the opposite side? You can let them just hang out and maybe plot and scheme. I mean,
it's a dilemma that all revolutionaries face, and it's exacerbated when you have like enemies on the border, which is, I think, the real source of the reign of terror, going back. Well, like all revolutionary terror is going all the way back to the French Revolution, because the aristocratic nations that were surrounding them were like constantly threatening them, and also the French royal family was legit plotting with these enemies over the border.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think this is really fascinating because the geographer in me is perking up now. I'm like, the geography of revolution, the political geography. So the economic one, but like the political and economic geography of revolution, like when you talk about encircling and whatnot, is fascinating. I wonder if anyone. I'm gonna have to look and see if anyone said anything on that. Not that I can. Not that I can take up a new project, God, but yeah. Go ahead.
There was one historian of the French Revolution who did like a timeline, like a chronology study of like when these sort of assaults from the counter-revolutionary aristocratic nations surrounding France, when the correlation between that and the massacres, the uptick in terror was related to the war, the international war.
Well, the level of distrust, and if you know that certain people, like for a fact, certain people are on the other side, it's hard to be like, oh well, we changed our mind. It's cool, baby. It's cool. I mean, we were fighting in the streets last week, but now we're, when it's literally, if it's two different countries, to use that word, fighting. Once the fighting is over, of course, you go back to the one army goes back and whatever, and then you're not actually trying to live in the same space.
Yeah.
So that's difficult. Zulaika, do you have anything you want to chime in with?
Can you hear me okay? My audio went out, so I missed a bit of it, but I don't have anything to add.
Did you hear the part about when we're talking about Benjamin Franklin's son?
I did, and I read the article and how they never spoke to each other again. So that was very sad. Oh wow! It's just, imagine sending your son to live
I just want to
3,000 miles away.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to chime in with you because I know that we're keeping your volume when you're not talking. We're keeping your volume on mute. So I just want to check in every
Yeah.
once in a while. And of course, if there's something you want to say, you can also unmute yourself and be like, to chime in. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's really an interesting thing because and also I'm thinking about why maybe there's such a slow burn on some of these issues. I was thinking about Kashmir now because if you think of it's not there's the border dispute, but it's not just Pakistan and India. It's also China. You have other things going on around there. So maybe that's some of the reasons, like the
Geopolitics.
the geopolitics make or one reason why these things tend to drag on forever. Maybe, I don't know. And also then you have Israel Palestine as well, but of course that's a bit different because the US has such a it's not that Israel has friends in the region. They have the United States. The United States buys off certain rulers, so that's a bit different than having like actual like, hey, we like you guys here. Welcome. So I think that's a fascinating point. Okay. Yeah. So to we have about 12 minutes left on this topic. So I guess quickly, in a nutshell, to people who listen to Ruffo, I don't even know it anymore. Now I'm paranoid. And Yarvin about a revolution. What would you, if you had their ear? Let's say that after this, well, that's what you wrote the article for. What would you want to tell them? What would be like the 2 or 3 main points you'd want them to consider, as opposed to what they're getting from this crowd?
I'd say that you can't have it both ways. That you can't have like a radical positive change without being a revolutionary. And that's never happened in history anywhere, including in America. So America is not exceptional, other than its geography. That meant it didn't have to have the kind of conflicts and chaos that other countries had. And if you're opposed to the elite and want a radical change in it, then you are a revolutionary. And there are different kinds of revolutionaries, but what you're asking for is not a counter-revolution. Unless maybe you're literally a neo-monarchist like Curtis Yarvin. But I honestly don't think most of his readers seriously are, and I know almost for a fact that the majority of like right populists are not.
Yeah. It's hard to go from "Don't tread on me" to "Where's the king?"
Yeah.
You never know. I mean, unless you get really psychoanalytic, like we all want the master and we just think we don't, or we want one but we don't want to have to admit that we want one or need one, or that's a different topic. I really was interested. This was really fascinating to me, and again, there's a couple of things in that I really had no idea. I think the anecdote or the what happened between Benjamin Franklin and William Franklin is quite present, and that I didn't even. It's just kind of, you just think like, oh, then it was over and it was fine. That the redcoats left, but I never really thought about the people who weren't redcoats who were who were either neutral or who just kind of like maybe I want to be like, well, let's see, wanted to play both sides, like let's see what works out. Like America was in both World War I and World War II for the first half of it. See how things play out. So it's really interesting. And I know that you said that you were still, this is still something you're working through. Is this a particular interest of yours? How people think, the perceptions and misperceptions about revolutions and counter-revolutions, in particular the American one.
I think
still
so.
May be ongoing. We haven't finished it yet. It could be.
Maybe. Well, there is a left-wing angle here that like I talk about, where it's ironic that Ruffo is saying that like the American Revolution was a counter-revolution, when that's what people on the far left are saying, and they said it first, and it's like, how did he get on the same page as them? Right? Their take is that it was a counter-revolution against the abolition of slavery, and that somehow the British were heading towards an abolition of slavery. In some ways, that almost kind of dovetails with Edmund Burke, because I think one of the, actually, I'm not sure if he said this about the American Revolution, but he I don't know. Let me pull back from that. There's a number of different problems with Edmund Burke, but I think I lost my train of thought.
It's all right. Well, it's okay. Zulaika has wanted you to talk a bit about where you criticized Garland Nixon.
Gerald Horne, you mean?
Sorry, Gerald Horne.
Sorry, Gerald Horne. Yeah.
They have a show together. That's why I got them confused.
That's okay. I was also wondering. I was like, oh, maybe I missed that. I'm like, maybe he got. And I was like, yeah. What you talking about, Garland? How dare you? No.
Who had a show together?
Sorry?
Yes, it's on Sputnik. It's on Radio Sputnik.
Garland Nixon and Gerald Horne did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay, so what's going on with Gerald Horne? Sometimes I hear there's some stuff he says, and I'm like, okay, there's some stuff that causes me pause. I'm like, but I haven't really delved into it much. I'm just a bit more. Yeah, he seems. Yeah. Anyway, who cares what I think about him? What's your beef with Gerald?
Well, he did, provide inspiration for the 1619 Project, and kind of the thesis of the 1619 Project, following after Horne's book, The Counterrevolution of 1776, is that somehow slavery was going to be abolished under the British in the 1700s, and that the founding fathers started the revolution in order to preempt that, which has been roundly criticized by other historians, even some Black historians of some accomplishment, and in spite of that, it was seized on by the establishment, by the New York Times, to do this series, sort of promoting that point of view, and try to promote it in schools as well. I think it's I think it's kind of a counter-revolutionary doctrine. I mean, I think it's a way of promoting, I guess, historical nihilism, and to sort of override the idea that people can make revolutions from below, that revolutions have to come from above, from the elite. Empirically, there just isn't any basis that the British were going into this direction, besides some sort of minor disputes. They ultimately didn't abolish slavery until after some American states did, because some American states in the North did abolish slavery after the Revolution of 1776. As I mentioned in the article, the British fought to suppress the Haitian Revolution, which took place a decade or so after the American and French revolutions. So that's not well grounded. I think there needs to be some kind of redemption of patriotic socialism and a patriotic revolutionary spirit, because within the context of its time, of Western civilization, which has many faults, but most of what took place in 1776 was an improvement over what we had. And I think it's a lot of the forces in the establishment that are trying to sort of, over the past couple of decades, the liberal historians who've been kind of focused on denouncing Jeffersonian racism may actually be trying to undermine notions of Jeffersonian democracy.
Mm.
And I think populists need to sort of stand up for that idea.
What I would say is, again, I'll just add that from what I'm more familiar with the post-colonial movement or post-colonial theory or post-colonialization, I think, which is also kind of it's also akin to kind of, it's a branch of French theory, because before French theory was all the storm, most decolonial theory was quite Marxist, was quite politically economic focused, and then when the French theory comes writing, and then you become more focused on the psyche and culture and language and discourse, which are not unimportant things, but the other stuff got swept away, and then you get this historiography, and also like the provincialization of Europe and whatnot. And so when I think of the Hannah Jones Project, because she's a journalist, not a historian, for one thing, is that if you have historiography, if you take it a certain way, it's like, well, history is a story like any other story. So whereas here's been the standard American history, but we're going to do a history where it's centered on race, and starts with the first slave being brought to the quote unquote New World, which obviously was already a world for the people who were here, and have that be centered around that. And if you have a problem with it, who cares? Because history is a discourse. It's like there's your discourse, our discourse. There's the dominant one. There's the white one. There's the whatever one. This is ours. And and the people who actually who do history in a more traditional way, of course, we're like, well, you just can't. There's some like seriously factual errors here. So the more kind of archive, more, I guess, empirical or whatever you want to call it, historians were like, what? And then the ones who want to be like, look, you could say it's very undialectical, because what they're doing is they're creating a false history that's just as false as the one that doesn't address slavery at all or minimizes it. Is that, you have all these things. You have the slavery, you have the race, the colonial, the imperialism. You have that, but you also have the democracy. You have the Bill of Rights. You have the other parts. So rather than to say which one's false and which one's good, is to deal with the fact that these things are there, and to deal with the contradictions and the dynamics and the things that predominate. And if someone wants to focus on race and on slavery, that's fine. But with the realization of what you're doing, you're abstracting that out and marginalizing the rest. Okay, fine, but why are you doing it? Just to be honest about it, rather than to be this kind of like, rather than to use the race card or the sex card, for lack of a better word, that, the people that have an issue with the 1619 Project are just, they don't want to let go of their white privilege or their male privilege, or the male dominated the male dominated way of doing history, and there could be I'm not saying, there could be things to that. So I think this notion of history and history, when they say historiography, we have to take the ography seriously. This is our story, a different story of this history, one that's focused, one that's centering on slavery, and from that also the other, the colonialism and obviously that's interrelated. Okay, fine. It'd be really stupid to marginalize the fact that the United States, is that when you have the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution while you have slavery, and while you're doing all the stuff that you're doing to the native population. Of course, it's a contradiction, but it doesn't mean that all the other stuff was bad and tainted, and that no matter what you can do, it's just okay. It's white supremacy all the way through and all the way down is equally problematic as in terms of the histories that kind of really didn't want to deal with that very much. So that would be my thing on that, is it's very undialectical of them to do that. But in a way, they kind of don't deny it, or the 1619 Project doesn't deny it. It's like, we're it's kind of, they in a way kind of a wink, like, well, this is a creative enterprise in part. It's a thought experiment. But the problem is that's not how it gets presented in the New York Times, really. And it's certainly not how it gets taken up at high schools and middle schools that teach it as if, this is so as if this history should replace the standard one that came before, rather than be in a dialogue or a tension with it. I went on a bit too long. Zulaika, do you want to say something about that before we move on to some of the comments?
No, I just found it interesting because when I was at school, we were being taught about the transatlantic slave trade. They did teach it as though that was the end of slavery forever, and that the British Empire didn't go and find indentured servants from all over the world to replace the slaves that they had bought. Yeah, that's.
Could you say that again?
Oh, right. No, I was just saying, when I was taught about the transatlantic slave trade, they taught it as though slave emancipation in the British Empire was the end of slavery everywhere, and they didn't go and find indentured servants from all over their colonies and bring them to their slave colonies or former slave colonies to do the work that the slaves had then not done or whatever.
Yeah.
But I only mentioned it because in comparison to how the American Revolution, we're not talking about the American Revolution, but from what you said, it's very different. I mean, there's still a racialized aspect, but there is far more, it sounds like there's far more guilt involved in the teaching.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of appeal to, self-flagellation of a particular, within the American context, that sort of leaves out the rest of the world and, the overall history of slavery, globally between 1619, which is very un-Marxist. And I guess I wouldn't expect that from the New York Times, except, that they pretend to be progressive. I'm kind of disappointed in Gerald Horne, and a lot of his theories of history don't strike me as being Marxist and dialectical when you dig into them, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it does strangely end up whitewashing the British, who are, after all, the people who started all this, in the 1600s, the 1500s, and the American founders simply inherited it. And they had, a kind of a bad conscience about it in private, not necessarily in public, although obviously that came out to some extent among the Northern founding fathers, which is why they did phase out slavery in the North long before the British did. And then when the British did abolish slavery, they used it as a pretext to go to Africa and try to abolish their slavery and then colonize them in the name of freeing them from slavery. So the 1619 Project and Gerald Horne don't really address those issues.
Okay, quickly, we have some comments and questions that I want to go through so people don't feel like we're ignoring them. The Johners: would be interesting to relate this to populism of the English Revolution and expansion of human rights being taken from the king while removing rights from women and religious minorities. That was 8:28, so that was like 20 minutes ago. So we must have been talking about the American Revolution then and populism. Or what? Yeah, or when I think it was when I asked you what you would want to tell these people who are listening to Rufo and Yarvin. Do you have anything to say about the Johners?
I'm not clear which English Revolution he's talking about, 1688 or 1640s.
Okay. If you're still listening, Jonas, if you could tell us which revolution you're talking about, that would be helpful, and I'll come back to you. If
But
you're
I
still
probably won't give a great answer either way because I don't.
well,
have
we'll
any
try. We
as
try.
well as
America.
Alex.
So Putin's shirt is saying this from 8:29. It's like 10 minutes ago. The American Revolution wasn't a counter-revolution, but it also wasn't a working people revolution. Like the French Revolution, it was a bourgeois revolution, not a proletarian one. Yeah, I don't think we said it was, but I think that yeah, I mean the bourgeois revolution is what before there was that, was there really a proletariat to speak of? I mean, you have to. I think one comes before the other. So I mean, in terms of yeah, as at least as my Marxist understanding is that people want to is that the Marxists and Marx himself and Engels were not opponents of bourgeois revolutions. They just didn't think they were the end. And of course then you have the contradiction of bourgeois society, which is the labor capital one, that precludes them from having from the world matching their norms and values, I would say. The capital labor one puts a wrinkle on all that, especially with industrial technology or production. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I agree. Marx praised bourgeois revolutions against feudalism, against aristocrats, and Lenin explicitly, he wrote a letter to the American workers in 1918 where he called the American Revolution a really progressive, and I think he even said really liberating revolution that American workers should look to for inspiration. So obviously it's not exactly the same as it was in the 1700s, but that it was a radical and positive thing in its time. That's I think basically part of the Marxist theory.
Well, and also at the times when they were writing the Declaration of Independence and I'll just stick on the American Revolution. Obviously, those things were, as no one will be surprised, everyone knows this, were for property owning men, white men. But over time, again, not because the powerful were so fantastic and friendly, but that document's existence and the how it's held were used by women to advocate for for equal rights, and was used by abolitionists and all that stuff's like, what about, you're, all created equal, this and that. What about, what about us? And so I think that in itself,
would agree.
Yeah, he would agree, and that's why it's bad, right?
Yeah. It's just say
what you started.
Once the cat is out of the...
It didn't just end with the white male property owners. Soon you got these bitches, and you got everybody. You got everybody, having equal political rights.
Piling
what
on.
the hell? Yeah, and then you got the cathedral isn't functioning anymore. It's sadness.
Yeah. Or mad democracy, as Edmund Burke said about the uprisings in Haiti after the French Revolution. He said the disease is spreading.
Spread. You gotta, and that's the thing. You can't have these proofs of concepts. I mean, Jesus. Then what are you gonna do? Or it becomes harder to stamp it out. Yeah. So okay. Putin's shirt. Whether the American Revolution was a fight against the British abolitionists or not, no one can deny that British abolition movement was won by one freeing slaves in every British colony. Yeah, I know that the British abolished slavery before the Americans did. I know that.
On the national,
or at least the slave trade. Yeah. There's also things about that, because also the America at a certain point said, okay, we're not gonna bring any more slaves over, but they still had slavery. They just had to be
the slave trade was
reproduced on the plantation.
phased out by, I believe, 1810, but not slavery itself. The American slave trade. I don't know about the British slave trade, but
yeah. Zulaika, do you know anything about this? It's okay if you don't.
Not really, but like I was saying, they would bring indentured servants over. So they brought indentured servants from China, and they also brought indentured indentured servants from India and East Africa, I believe. So, it's
I know there's pictures.
when
I
you
know there's
start talking about
pictures of
bringing
people.
indentured you go you get indentured servants. You've got to sort of wonder whether or not it was actually abolished in a serious way. And of course, we know that modern slavery still exists, and they're still talking about legislating against modern slavery in the UK now. I mean, one of our former prime ministers, she was a conservative and roundly disliked, but one of her things was getting rid of modern slavery, which is coming through wealthy immigrants, bringing basically indentured servants to their homes. Oh, I can't hear Tara.
Oh, sorry. Also, people have the legal loopholes, yeah? So it's like, oh, no, this is our indentured servant. He's not our slave. He's, I mean, I can imagine.
Or they say, oh, he's working for us for whatever reason, or he's my cousin, or whatever.
Yeah. And you can't talk to him, or, I mean, one can imagine. Yeah. Okay, so Putin's shirt, the Americans... Go ahead, sorry.
Servitude is, that's an ongoing problem. But it was also an ongoing phenomenon, among all races prior to the development of African chattel slavery in the Americas, right? Mm-hmm. So I should be clear, like when we talk about slavery, in this context, it's chattel slavery, where when you buy a person, you're also buying their children, right? Mm. And they sort of have no legal identity besides the legal identity that like you give to them. Mm-hmm. And that's called chattel slavery. And that's a specific thing. Before that, there were black indentured servants in the Americas, in Virginia, and there were also white indentured servants. They only really made it racialized after 1619. That's like really, actually, it was actually well after 1619. It wasn't clear that the black people who came in 1619 were chattel slaves in the sense that you owned their children and could break up their family and all this stuff. But yeah, that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah. Putin's shirt, the Americans refused to end slavery. Well, who was asking them to? And was one of the former, again, I'm a serious question because this part of history is not my best, was one of the last former British colonies to do so. So much for American be revolutionary. Well, there's more kinds of revolution than, first of all, revolutionary can be bad or it can be good. So revolution in itself is, you can have a revolution in, warfare and germ warfare. So what I would say is that, yeah, obviously the Americans, were slow on that. But if you look at the source of labor, particularly in the South, compared to what was going on in the British colony, in other British colonies and in Britain, not the same thing. Got to have labor coming from someplace. Which isn't I'm not excusing it, but I also wasn't. But I think that the idea that since this is a weird, I find this kind of an odd comment, that since the Americans didn't since the American Revolution didn't abolish slavery, it wasn't a revolution. I say bullshit. Certainly incomplete. I mean, no one's going to say that it was when they said men, they meant all men, or that they considered Africans to be humans like they were. No, a lot of them, I'm sure, didn't. Although Jefferson kind of equivocates, he's but then he was in love with one, or maybe he was in love with one. I don't know. I don't know if you can be in love with someone who's your slave. I don't know. Could Sally say no? I mean, I don't. Anyway, different story. Go ahead. Do you want to say anything about this before we move on?
Well, I'd say Jefferson himself is not a great example in terms of the slavery issue, but definitely, as I said, some founders were anti-slavery, and I think the overall point is just keeping in mind. You shouldn't make generalizations about America totally, because you can't really make generalizations about something that big. Mm-hmm. But that there were aspects of the American Revolution that were definitely the American Revolt and the founders that were definitely revolutionary. And Rufo, name check specifically Samuel Adams. And so Samuel Adams, as I said, is someone who definitely hated monarchy. In some of his private writings, as he says some stuff that's anti-racist by the standards of its time, and which were definitely anti-slavery as well.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, also I think, and this is kind of a really kind of a oversimple way of doing it, but you ask yourself, if you could have a wand, would you say that the American Revolution or what we call the American Revolution, it would have been better if it hadn't happened? Because they didn't didn't abolish slavery? I would be hard pressed to say that. And eventually it got there, again, not because the slave owners or the property owners were so great. There are a variety of reasons why slavery fell. And unfortunately, I would like to think there was all the moral when enough people realized that this is just an abomination, but there were other considerations. It wasn't only the abolitionists played a role, and Lincoln's thoughts on it seems to have changed, but it wasn't this idea that the revolution was that the North bounded together solely to free the slaves is not true. But it is nice that was that happened as a result of it. Of course, there was several issues between the differences between the North and the South, and of course the slave-based economy being a big one couldn't continue.
Yeah, and I should say to our commenter that I don't mean to disparage the British abolitionist movement. I'm just saying that the British elite didn't really have any abolitionist commitments, and when the abolitionist wave got going in the 19th century, they exploited it to the sort of least liberating, most imperialist agenda they could.
Mm-hmm. So the Johners has gotten back in his 1640s. So if that helps you. So there's back the idea that, let me see if I can find his original thing. Okay. Johnner's original comment. Would be interesting to relate this to the populism of the English Revolution 1640. And the expansion of human rights being taken from the king while removing rights from women and religious minorities.
Yeah, that's kind of tricky. Like I said, my grasp of English history isn't that great. It was, as I point out in the article, which again was kind of written almost for a more right-wing audience. As I pointed out in the article, it was a Puritan revolution, so it came with detrimental aspects of the Puritans.
Yeah. Pure and impure. Those pure and impure Puritans, yeah. All right. So sorry, Johners. It's an interesting question, but we don't know. We can't really answer it. So I'll have to put a pin in it. Maybe you could do some work on this, or maybe you have. I don't know if you're a student and not necessarily like you'd be like a student like in school, or you could just be a student of this topic. But if you want to come on and explore it more, you're welcome to let me know. Let's see. Now I need to go back to see if there's any more things. Let's see. Could argue that the New Model Army held the New Model Army. Does that mean anything to you?
Oliver Cromwell's army.
Okay, the New Model Army held some proto-Marxist beliefs.
I don't know about the leadership of the New Model Army. I don't know if Cromwell did, but I mentioned in the article the Levelers, who were a sort of a certain sect of Puritans aligned with Cromwell, at least initially, who had many of the ideas that eventually were put into the Bill of Rights about freedom of speech and I think even freedom of religion. They were sort of the more tolerant wing of the Puritans, if that makes sense. They were very big on debate and free thought.
They weren't inclusive. They didn't have a DEI officer. I'm sorry. Okay. So we're gonna do the Johners has, and if I'm saying this wrong, Johners, I'm sorry. I have my my West American pronunciation. What can I do? If I'm saying it wrong, you can correct me. I've said Zuleika's name 5 different ways, but I finally got it. And I was like, can I just call you Z? And I thought that's rude. I should learn how to say her name. So we're gonna do 2 comments, and then we're gonna have a bit of a coffee/tea or smoke break, about 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and switch topics to talk about how this child-free discourse/movement is problematic. Is that all right, Garrett? So we'll take 2 more.
Sure.
We'll finish up with Johners, and then we'll take a 5-10 minute break, and then we'll come back and switch gears to the child-free discussion and the Malthusian. There's a Malthusian cloud over a lot of the quote unquote left liberals in particular. All right. So Johners could argue that the real excuse me. I definitely need a coffee break or something, tea break. Could argue that the real revolutionaries of the American Revolution were just members of the British colonial aristocracy grating against monarchical rule. That's at you, Garrett.
I haven't really heard that theory. I mean, there
could be the Johners. This could be a Johners original.
There were no official aristocrats among the founding fathers. Some of them did have they had some aristocratic blood, particularly in the South. But I don't consider that to be like official colonial aristocracy.
Yeah, I mean,
they're bourgeois aristocracy, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, you can make an analogy that, of course, there was definitely an upper class. I mean, there was definitely people who owned most of the land and industry, and I don't know how literate. I don't know how literacy was. How literate, and by literacy, I don't just mean being able to read and write, but that's one thing. But like learned, because a lot of these guys were, quite erudite
compared to most European populations. The Americans were quite well educated.
Yeah. So again, Johners, you'll have to come on. You'll have to come on. You'll have to come on and you'll have to come on screen at some point and share with us this, and then we could get a bit of a handle on it, because we're not. Yeah, this isn't any of our forte apparently. One last one before our break. The economic advantages. Okay. This is probably okay. Maybe this is. I'll read them these 2 together. You could argue that the real revolutionaries of the American Revolution were just members of a British colonial aristocracy grating against monarchical rule, and their economic advantages, so entwined in the institution of slavery, made them predisposed to defend it. So I think he's trying to.
That's the dialectic working through them.
Well, I think so. I think this is a comment in terms of, we're talking about what do you do with the fact that you have the positive aspects of the American Revolution, but you have, of course, slavery and chattel slavery, which is particularly nasty, maybe the most nasty kind. Not that there's a good way to be. I'm not, I don't like when people try to make the good slave argument. That's a whole other thing. But and of course, what was going on with the Native American population. Those are pretty big gaps or lacks or holes, whatever you want to say. But I think this is, maybe he's talking about that were so entwined that it made them predisposed to defend it. Yeah. It's also, maybe this was the original third rail issue that they really avoided having to deal with slavery. And when they finally did confront this and the broader and the competing political, I have to even say cultural political economies, when we're talking about the North and the South before the Civil War, that, look how much, look how maybe it was always going to require a tremendous amount of violence to get rid of. And then then after that, we had Jim Crow. Well, we had a brief period of Reconstruction, and there's the carpetbaggers and all this crap, and then the new Jim Crow, and we're still working that out. And by we, I don't mean that white people and black people are working this out with the same consequences. Don't get me wrong. I'm not that silly. Anything you want to say before we take a break, Garrett or Zulaika? No?
I just what he says is just like a truism, and I don't.
You don't dispute it. Yeah.
I don't dispute it. I mean, obviously, the Southern founders of the country were much more attached than slavery, and as I said, they had a bad conscience about it. They hoped that it would wither away with economic development. That was their sort of
then they wouldn't have to.
Their proto-Marxist sort of, but I wouldn't even call it. Their sort of, I guess, airheaded progressive view is that industrial development would just phase out slavery, but then like the problem is that the cotton gin then made cotton so cheap that expands the market, which then expands slavery. So that's why you need political economy. The free market is not a politically progressive force.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. On that note, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Thank you, all the listeners out there, and thank you for the comments. I realize that I don't always get to them as quickly as you'd like, but I am a one-woman show doing this for free, which is fine. I mean, I love doing it, but I just want to say that, no one's paying me. So I try my, not that, just saying, if you want to do a super chat, then I'll for sure, then you for sure get up right away if I can see what that means. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. We're going to shift gears. We have been talking about revolution and counter-revolution, what populists need to do based on Garrett's recent Substack on the Social Populist. And we're going to, when we come back, we're going to take up our critique of the so-called child-free movement, particularly focusing on its more kind of Malthusian aspects or specters, and also how I think it's anti-mother, anti-social, anti-child, just problematic all the way around. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Please stay tuned. And Garrett and Zulaika, I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Enjoy your break. Union time, union card. All right, so I'm just going to turn on some music here. And so for people, because if I can't end the stream because then everything will end and that will be a